Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Kane Sports Countdown to Kickoff as the Miami Hurricanes get ready to host the Virginia Cavaliers in Game 6 of their 2020 campaign. A big one for the Hurricanes to keep the momentum going as they continue to jockey for that number 2 spot in the ACC going into the championship game in December. I'm Gary Furman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, joined by Brad Franklin of CavsCorner.com, and we're going to talk a little bit about Virginia and break down this game on Saturday from our separate viewpoints. And Brad, welcome back to Kane Sports Countdown to Kickoff. And I guess I should start out by setting the table a little bit. Virginia is a program that had really solid 2018 and 2019 campaigns. They were combined 17-10 those 2 years. They had a quarterback in Bryce Perkins that was a difference maker for them. But I think it would be safe to say right now that this is not the same team that we saw in 2018 and 2019. They've been a little inconsistent here in the first half of the season. They come into this game 1-3 with the lone victory against a hapless Duke squad that now has a 1-5 record, losing to Clemson like everybody does. But the thing that struck me a little bit was the way they lost to NC State and Wake Forest, giving up 38 and 40 points, and expected Virginia to be a little bit better on defense than that. So why don't we just start out by talking about Virginia in general, how they're transitioning out of the Bryce Perkins era, and whether this start to 2020 has been extremely disappointing for the folks up there in Charlottesville.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been disappointing, especially because, as you mentioned, that defense was expected to be much better than it has shown. I feel like, one of the reasons why Bronco was able to sort of turn this thing around, part of 17 and then 18 and 19 was in part because, Bryce Perkins was really good at the game of football. But also, too, I think that Virginia developed a style of play that really fit not only its personnel, but also sort of the school and the recruiting kind of footprint and whatnot. It's all about complementary football, right? So what was Virginia good at last year? Like, yes, Bryce Perkins was good, but it had a solid defense, and its special teams never, always kept them in a good field position. Joe Reed was one of the best returners in the country, easily one of the top couple in the ACC, and easily the best in Virginia school history. Now he's playing for the Chargers, and special teams does not look the same. It's funny to think that one dude could change special teams, but, man, they just don't look like anything resembling themselves from last year on that side of the coin. And then also, too, defensively, even though they returned so much experience, they have not been the same. I'm not sure if that's a function of, issues in the secondary that sort of cropped up last year amid injury once Bryce Hall went down in that Miami game last year. It was a gruesome injury to him and a tough result for the Cavaliers, and certainly to lose an All-American like that. Virginia's not a program that has a lot of those dudes just kind of growing on trees. And so that team has just not been the same in terms of defending the pass. You mentioned the way NC State and Wake Forest took them to the woodshed. Both of those games were frustrating for different reasons. In the NC State game, I didn't think Virginia was there the whole day. In the Wake Forest game, they weren't there early. They fought back, high game, 23-all, and then 3 mistakes in a row that really underscore my point about the complementary football piece. They lose a run fit, so a kid pops a 75-yard run for a touchdown. They fumble a kickoff, muff it, and Wake recovers, and then they throw an interception on the ensuing drive. So all 3 phases, making mistakes late. That's just the thing that this Virginia program hasn't done the past few years. So I think it's very safe to say that this has been a very disappointing start to the season, which I think can be explained by a variety of different reasons, most notable of which is just like, hey, sometimes when you're trying to replace a legend, it's hard. And right now Virginia's kind of scuffling a little bit trying to figure out how to get back to that complementary aspect.
Well, they've been allowing 34.8 points a game so far this year and 413.5 yards. And the thing that's really been striking about it is the big plays they've been giving up. I think they had like 5 or 6 in the game last week against Wake Forest that allowed Wake Forest to win going away 40-23, which is really unusual for a Bronco Mendenhall defense. nothing but mad respect for the way that guy can coach and can draw it up on that side of the ball. But from the outside looking in, it's been kind of shocking, to be honest with you, Brad. Why do you think they've been giving up so many big plays?
Well, I think part of it is their personnel, right? So they're just not, they have over the past few years they've had a nice run of NFL caliber DBs come through that program, right? Tim Harris is in San Francisco, Juan Thornhill's in Kansas City, Bryce Hall now getting back on the field after that injury last year with the Jets, and so again, this is not a program where those kinds of dudes grow on trees. Even though Bronco's done a really good job of developing a lot of good kids. So I think the secondary has been easily the biggest issue, right? So when Virginia was playing earlier in the season last year, when that defense was really good, they were healthy in the secondary. And what I think was most important for them was being able to create havoc in the backfield, and they were able to do that because their DBs, they could throw them in single coverage, and those guys were fine. In the first 8 games of 2019, Virginia only gave up 20 points per game, had 4 sacks per game. They only had 0.9 what we call big pass plays per game, right, which is essentially 20-yard throws, right? So that's what they averaged, right? In the last 6 games of that season, they're giving up 15 more points a game. Their sack numbers are down, and they're giving up 3 of those completions, right? So they basically tripled that rate, and that's essentially what's happened in the first 4 games of this season, right? They're giving up 34.8. They're giving 3.7 of those big completions, those big plays down the field. And so it's really interesting to sort of see that data sort of lay out there. The defense that Bronco had the first half of last season is not the same one he had the last half, and it's not the same one that he's got now. Charles Snowden and Noah Taylor, I thought coming into the season, probably 2 of the best outside linebackers in the league. They have just not been anywhere close. The blitz packages that Bronco's been running, it seems like teams are like, oh, so your DBs aren't as good. We're just going to throw right at you, and that's exactly what Wake Forest did. And credit Sam Hartman and that coaching staff down in Winston-Salem, because they just came out looking for scalps, man, and they just racked them up left and right. I felt like Virginia's defensive backs, they were in a chase position all day, couldn't make plays on the ball because they weren't anywhere close. And needless to say, that's got to be something that cleans up. Especially this is the wrinkle that's really hard for this game. Virginia lost 3 of their experienced DBs, guys who were making mistakes in that game, right? 3 of them went down with injury. We don't know their status going into this. Are you going to be throwing like a whole bunch of new dudes out there against this offense? I mean, that's tragic in a lot of ways, right? But then again, the experienced guys were the ones making the mistakes. So, it's going to be an interesting, thing to see how Bronco and his staff sort of address the issue that he mentioned on Monday during his media availability that, the big plays down the field are what's killing them. They got to play complementary football, and that's a big point. But the defense, in terms of it's cleaned up its act, those big plays are just crushing them. And that's going to have to – if they're going to turn this thing around, it's got to start there. And I don't know if it starts this weekend and next because they're playing Miami and then Carolina. But, man, it's got to happen in a hurry.
Well, they're going to go against the Miami offense that's looking to get back to making big plays. The Hurricanes were making a lot of them early in the year. They've gone back-to-back games now against better defensive teams of Clemson and Pittsburgh. And the big plays have really been saving them because their traditional offense has not been functioning extremely well. They've struggled to run the ball, and the downfield passing game has not been working anywhere close to the way that they wanted to. So what they've done is they took all 9 receivers who have all been underachieving the entire season, and they made them all potential first-teamers. There's 9 receivers on the depth chart with or status, this guy or that guy or that guy, 3 guys at each of the 3 receiver positions, and they're just letting them fight it out in practice this week. I don't think there's any question that when you combine that with what we're seeing on the tape, that Miami's going to come out and look to hit some plays down the football field on Saturday night. So that's going to be an interesting subplot when you take Virginia trying to straighten out that part of their game and Miami trying to get it back. Whoever wins that battle is probably going to win the football game. And then on top of it, Virginia's going to have to deal with the tempo that Miami's going to bring to the stadium and De'Ara King running the ball. And so there's going to be a lot on Bronco's plate as he game plans this week. So how have they handled the disappointment? I mean, I got to think it had to be a little bit of a shock to them to be, allowing yardage chunks like that and points the way they have. How have they handled it mentally and emotionally?
I think after that Duke game in the opener, and I mean, it's worth pointing out, right? Like Virginia had like 5 openers, right? They had the original schedule, and they had the new schedule, and then they had that game canceled, and then they had their other game that was supposed to be the opener against Tech moved. It was a lot of moving and shaking, and they were in preseason for like 2.5 months or something crazy, right? So I think it's worth pointing out, like by the time, and especially given COVID protocols and whatnot, like by the time they got to football, they were just happy, beyond happy to play football, right? And that Duke game, they turned him over 7 times. Cutcliffe's offense is typically pretty good. His quarterback play is usually pretty good. Chase Bryce, by that point, it was pretty obvious to me at least, wasn't going to be anywhere in the neighborhood of what Cutcliffe has had at that position. But then, man, when they get to Clemson, and you understand, like, hey, this is going to be what it is. But Virginia was in that game in a variety of ways. Certainly was never in a position to, like, make it so that like Clemson was playing from behind or anything like that. But considering the beatdown Clemson put on them in the ACC championship game several months before, right? It was a nice sort of measuring stick, and they felt really good coming out of that game, and certainly I did too about them. And then, man, they just laid an absolute egg against NC State. It was another slow start for them offensively. Certainly, in my estimation, I would say that guys are, Bronco called them resolute. I think they understand that a lot of the mistakes that they're making can be corrected. I think that's the thing. Is like they're not being out talented or out schemed. It's really just execution. These should be things that they can clean up. The question is, how long does it take them to clean it up? And then to Bronco and his staff, what are you going to do at defensive back? Are you going to keep riding with the dudes that you played if they're healthy? Are you going to instead of so much one-on-one coverage? Are you going to start playing more zone? Are you going to drop some linebackers back? Are you going to switch up the scheme? Because Bronco's not married to a 3-4. He'll play a 4-3 if he needs to, play a 3-3-5 stack. Matter of fact, he said before that the 3-3-5 is probably his most preferred defensive alignment. But he doesn't think, like, from a personnel standpoint, that's what he's going to, year in and year out be able to put on the field. So I think in terms of their emotion and the kind of mental side of it, I would say that they are a team that really could use some good stuff to happen. The fact that they, fought back in that weight game and were in it in the fourth quarter, and then only to see it sort of explode. These guys came to Virginia at a time when Virginia wasn't very good, and they are the dudes who sort of put Virginia back in a place where they were kind of consistent, where you sort of knew what to expect from them week to week. So for them to sort of see this kind of dissipate in front of them, I think it's definitely been disheartening. I think it's definitely been tough for them, and certainly given the sort of the way of the world and the pandemic and protocols and grab and go meals, and you can't hang out with anybody. Like, I think a lot of that mental strain is starting to show. I don't know if that's the specific reason why mistakes are being made, but I do think that it makes sense to me that a group that really could have used spring ball and certainly a more traditional sort of summer and off season, what didn't get that, like everybody else. So I'm not trying to make Virginia out to be different, but certainly seems like they are in a spot now where they're waiting for guys to make a play as opposed to guys are going out and making plays, and that's something that's got to stop if they want to get it turned around.
Well, they've got a good set of linebackers. You mentioned Noah Taylor earlier and Charles Snowden, a couple guys that are very highly regarded in the ACC, and then Zane Zandier is another one that was really, really good last year. Had a ton of tackles, a lot for loss, and was obviously a force defensively. So they do have some good players, and Joey Blunt at safety is another guy that is highly regarded. And, gets a lot of tackles. I know he missed one game this year, but I mean, these are just guys that are reputed to be solid defenders in the ACC. It's not that they're all-American candidates or anything like that, but just solid defensive players. So I imagine that that's who they're going to look to rally around and look to those guys who have done it before for leadership, because this is, without question, for Virginia, is a circle the wagons week. I don't think anybody would dispute that. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about the defense here. Let's shift gears to the offense. I mentioned Bryce Perkins at the start of the show, a guy that's carried the Virginia program through the past 2 seasons. He's not there anymore. Brennan Armstrong wins the starting job. And, I would say, got off to a so-so start, had good moments, bad moments. Had a decent completion rate, but he did throw some interceptions, hung in there against Clemson. And then he gets a concussion against NC State. And that makes him miss the Wake Forest game. And from what I understand, he returned to practice, at least to the practice field, middle of this week. Nobody knows whether he's going to play or not. Bronco has not said. Tell us a little bit about him and whether you think that we will see him in uniform on Saturday.
So Armstrong was kind of the heir apparent. He kind of fits. He's kind of this staff obviously Taysom Hill. He kind of fits that sort of style of runner better maybe than in this scheme, maybe even better than Perkins did when he was at UVA. What UVA did with Perkins was I don't want to say it was outside of the offense, but they definitely sort of played to his strengths a lot more. So instead of a lot of design stuff, read option stuff, they sort of let him freelance more. They sort of put him in positions where with passing plays where, a lot of whole, tip drill stuff and scrambling and whatnot. Armstrong has been at UVA for what feels like forever. He was essentially Bryce Perkins' understudy the entire time Bryce Perkins was at UVA. He was in that initial class that benefited from the redshirt rule change, so he was able to play and then also redshirt. So by going into this year, he might be light on starts and seat time, but he's been around the program, certainly been in the system long enough that a lot of folks I talked to, really expected him to be able to perform at a much higher level than he did in the opener. He was better, I think, against Clemson, especially in terms of picking up stuff on the ground. He's an emotional kid who actually kind of enjoys the running part of that dual threat quarterbacking. And so I think that in that game he looked his most comfortable. And, man, however comfortable he looked against Clemson, he just did not look it against NC State, which is just a bizarre sentence to say out loud. And then you mentioned the concussion and him trying to come back. He won the job, I think, in part because he knew the system. Virginia brought in a former four-star Rivals 100 kid, Keaton Thompson from Mississippi State, but he had a shoulder injury somewhere, I want to say like the third week or so of camp, and that kind of tilted not only the starting job Armstrong's way, but it's the reason why Thompson is now playing wide receiver. So what Virginia did when they didn't have Armstrong going into last weekend's game against Wake is they essentially threw everything in the kitchen sink at him, went with a three-quarterback sort of three-headed monster. Having covered Virginia for a long time, I can tell you that Virginia's done a lot of crazy stuff with rotating quarterbacks. I'm talking in games. I'm talking in drives. I'm talking about, like, dudes, like, taking the play in and having a different quarterback. So it was kind of poetic for me to watch Virginia do it, and it actually kind of worked. Both Thompson and Ira Arms are much more of the Perkins-type runner, but neither one of them at this point are guys that Virginia feels really comfortable throwing the ball. So then Armstrong's backup kid named Lindell Stone, who has been at Virginia forever. I think the nice way to say it is that he's probably not a guy who they thought was going to be a starter, but who has a really firm grasp of the playbook. And even if maybe he doesn't have the physical tools, he understands it very well, and certainly has he has an eye on coaching at some point. So they rolled them out against Wake, and honestly, I thought it worked. Had the defense not given up so many big plays down the field, it probably would have been fine. So the question now is, with Armstrong back at practice, at least in some capacity, what will Virginia do? My guess is that he's probably not going to play. My guess is if he does play, it's probably more a distraction. They're probably, given how well the three-headed thing worked in Winston-Salem, I could totally see Bronco and his staff saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to wait this week. We're going to give the kid as much time as he needs to come back. We're going to focus on – because, realistically, are they really going to win this game? I mean, come on. Like, don't risk the rest of the season putting this kid in a position where his mental, his confidence and stuff is hurt any more than it needs to be. Give him the time off. Let the three-headed monster play again. Get what you can. Honestly, if I had my druthers, I would say Virginia probably went away from doing enough of the shuffling of the guys in and out. That second half, there was a spell there where they went too much with Stone, who was the backup, as opposed to the other first, run first guys, and they were having a lot of success on the ground. So I think probably running with those three gives them the best chance to win this weekend, especially because I don't think Armstrong is anywhere close to being at a place where he can prep for, more than maybe a day. of practice,
Mm-hmm.
and with the travel and everything, I just don't think that's realistic. And maybe he trots out there on Saturday night. He's a tough SOB, but man, I would be really shocked if that's what happens.
All right, we talked about some of the disappointments on defense, and I think offensively, the fact that they're not having success behind an offensive line that didn't lose any starters from last year has to be a little bit disappointing, for them. I mean, they had I would think, be looking at that as a strength. Now, Wayne Talapapa is back.
There you go. You got it.
As the starting running back, and I mean he's got okay stats. I mean 245 yards so far this season, averaging 4.8 yards a carry, but it's nothing really sensational, and they haven't probably, I think you would agree, been able to run the ball maybe as well as they would have liked to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One of the things that about this Virginia offense, you're exactly right about the offensive line, and I actually think the offensive line has played pretty well in terms of the run game. I don't think they've done well. They've kept the quarterback clean, but I don't think that they've done a lot to really kind of move the ball forward, so to speak. Right. So there, I don't mean the actual football. I just mean like in terms of coming off of last season, in the way that defense returned so many experienced dudes and just hasn't been able to sort of make any extra hay out of it. Right. That offensive line has kind of been the same. That being said, I think Virginia's offense was predicated, one, on Armstrong, and he's obviously not been there the past game and a half. But there's also Ronnie Walker, who was a transfer running back, kid from here in Central Virginia and from Hopewell, who went to Indiana and transferred over. Everybody and their brother getting the eligibility waiver except Ronnie Walker, who transfers essentially home, right, from the Big Ten in the middle of a pandemic. And there was some weird NCAA thing that didn't get cleared up until the week, until like roughly now last week is when it went down. And then he became ill. Now, Virginia's not coming out and saying player X has tested positive for COVID. They're just saying, how many players, and then you sort of have to figure it out based on who's not there. Well, Ronnie Walker didn't make the trip to Winston-Salem, so he might not play in this game. There was much excitement around the program. And certainly among the fans about him being able to play last week. So when he didn't make the trip and they announced that there was one new COVID case, myself and a bunch of other folks kind of put two and two together. So I don't think at this point that it's likely he'll play. If he does, though, he's exactly the kind of running back this offense needs. He is kind of a multifaceted dude who can both run between the tackles and play it well in the passing game. He's an adequate pass blocker. So I think if he's able to play, whenever he does return, Virginia's offense will actually get a nice shot in the arm. Question is, who's the quarterback going to be? And then two, what's the drop situation, right? So this is a Virginia offense that for years now, regardless of whether it was Ben Kirk quarterback or Bryce Perkins, their receivers don't drop the football. I don't think Hassis Dubois had a single drop all last year, and Virginia already has more drops as a team this season already than they did all of last year combined. And this is not just like young kids who are playing bigger roles for the first time. These are experienced dudes like Terrell Jana, who was like a magnet last year at times. So I think Virginia has to help itself out, right? So like the receivers have to help the quarterback, offensive line has to help everybody. The one sort of breakout star on that side of the ball has been Lavelle Davis, the 6'7" true freshman wide receiver from South Carolina, who the day after he committed told me for a recruiting story, he said, they just needed dudes to go up and get it, and I'll go get it. And he has done that. He didn't have the best game against Wake, and I think that was in part because of the quarterback situation. But when they've got a decent quarterback who can throw it up there, that kid has been a really bright spot, certainly both in terms of his production but also in terms of his grades through the Pro Football Focus stuff that we run. His blocking numbers are absurd too. So they have some good pieces around. The problem is, just like on defense, they can't seem to get it all going in the right direction. Getting Armstrong back will help, but even with that three-headed deal at quarterback, I felt like last week there was a lot of plays they left on the field, and a lot of that comes down to dudes just not executing. That's something they got to clean up.
All right, so I feel your skepticism about this weekend in Miami, and I obviously agree that Miami's a clear favorite going into this game. And it's going to be, tough for Virginia to pull it all together and get this done. So let's say it plays out that way, okay? And now you're sitting there. You got your 1-4. You play Carolina next. Looking at 1-5 potentially, and there's a couple games down the stretch that maybe you could be competitive in. You got Louisville, Florida State, Boston College, Virginia Tech, but Boston College even is having a good season. So they're the only gimme left on Virginia's schedule is probably Abilene Christian. So are they psychologically prepared for a 2-win season in Charlottesville? Does Broncos survive that?
Well, the answer is yes, because they've done it once. He went 2-10 in 2016. I think though there's a brass tacks answer to that question, which is yes, he would survive it, because honestly they're not in a position where they could pay him to not coach, right? They couldn't fire him at this point. They're in the middle of obviously like everybody else, middle of a pandemic, but Virginia's also in the middle of a fundraising program or campaign rather for a new football facility, and that thing is stalled. Like the money is just not there right now, I think, for them to clean house, regardless of how bad this is. And I think the administration, even in a situation like this, would say, oh, but you know what, it's COVID. I don't think a lot of coaches are going to get run out of town, short of unless there are charges filed. And there's a lot of things you can expect from Bronco Mendenhall, but you know what, charges being filed against the dude just isn't on the list.
Right.
I think that it's very clear to me that this team is going to have to grow up or clean up a whole lot in order to not have the season you're describing. The gimme games were probably the two they just played. I understand NC State, with the Leary kid, is a better team than most folks probably expected, but that's a winnable game, and they didn't play. They didn't really show up. The way
and now he's out.
Very
he's
winnable
out
game.
for the rest of the season. That kid.
Exactly. The Wake Forest game was a winnable game, and you were in it, and you blew it, right? So now you've got two top 15 teams coming on the schedule. You're right. I think the Abilene Christian game is the only one that looks like a sure win. And hell, if you caught Virginia Tech at the time when you were supposed to play them, you probably would have beat them, right? But now they're going to be back to full strength by the time you get there in December, and that's not going to sit well with fans in general. But it's one of those things. It's like, I think the easiest explanation to me is to say that Virginia was on that good to great sort of line, and last year just made the plays to stay on the right side of it, and now all of the plays are going the other way, and they're on that bad, they're on the bad side, and they're probably not quite as bad as they look, and a handful of plays here and there would make them look a little better, but realistically, man, it's especially given their injury situation and the lack of seat time for Armstrong and sort of where that thing is. I'm definitely skeptical about Virginia's chances to go down and get a win here. I think, I understand that Miami has not had a good couple weeks, and I understand that the numbers are kind of, you were talking about the wide receivers and there was oars everywhere, right?
Yep.
This is a heck of a week for them to get right, because I look at Virginia's secondary and I think who's really going to be counted on and relied upon to really play down the field. And King is such a different, somebody asked me the other day, well, shouldn't Virginia be ready because of Perkins? And man, they are so different. Perkins was a guy who wanted to run, but he got the space so he could run. King is a dude who will run if he needs to, but he wants the space to throw. And he's like that. He's almost like Woody Dantzler to me, right? Just really difficult, not only to get him down, but also just to really kind of figure out what it is he's trying to do. And the tempo you mentioned too, I think that's also a piece of it. Virginia's done a better job, I think, this year playing with tempo, both offensively and playing against it defensively. But man, if they start going with that, especially against a team, that is, kind of banged up in the secondary, and guys are probably going to be some miscommunication issues. I don't have a lot of faith in UVA going down there and pulling off an upset. It would be the most 2020 thing for Virginia to figure it out against a top 15 team on the road. But it's definitely not something I'm expecting, nor is it something I'm going to predict.
All right, Brad. Well, it's going to be interesting. I think we've done a pretty good job here of setting the table for everybody, and I'm sure we'll see Virginia, rebound from this. They can recruit fairly well up there in Virginia. I don't know that they'll, I think you would agree that we'll never see that program as a powerhouse in college football, but they've proven that they can put recruiting classes together and get some good players, and they've certainly given Miami a very tough time through the years. So I wouldn't, write the Cavaliers off long term at all. They're going through a little bit of a tough time right now, and I'm sure Miami has no intention of letting them up on Saturday night. So we thank you. We thank you so much for your time, and for Brad Franklin of Cavs Corner, I'm Gary Furman. We thank you for joining us on Kane Sports Countdown to Kickoff, and we'll see you next time, everybody.